Hey, changemakers! Thank you for tuning into the Hacking the Patriarchy podcast. I'm your fervent feminist host, Raven O'Neill, and I get the honors of sitting down weekly with diverse experts from all walks of life to explore ideas, opportunities, and strategies that we can all use to hack our way to better lives within patriarchal societies. If you're ready to hack patriarchal systems and structures, I invite you to join us and help move the needle. In today's episode, I get the honor of sitting down with an extraordinary polymath who embodies the phrase, doing everything, everywhere, all at once. Aubria Ralph is a Caribbean-American professional whose journey spans corporate retail, higher education, law, entrepreneurship, and authorship. From her roots in St. Vincent and the Grenadines to becoming a top-tier attorney, community leader, and now the founder of Scrappy Girl Project, Aubria has dedicated her life to empowering women and pursuing multifaceted excellence. As an author of The Adventures of Boo and Chin and a passionate advocate for individual rights, she's not just breaking barriers, she's redefining them. Get ready for an inspiring conversation with a woman who proves that curiosity, discipline, and purpose can transform multiple career paths into an extraordinary life story. Please come together and offer Aubria a very warm welcome. Hi, Aubria. Welcome back to the show.
Hi, Raven. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. I completely forgot what we're going to be talking about today, but it's going to be awesome.
Well, we are going to take a hard turn from our last conversation, which was about writing your own narrative because you are an author. But not only are you an author, you are a lawyer. And we're going to talk about lawyering today. We're going to talk about AI. We're going to talk about going through law school and a bunch of things in between. And since our conversations are always so unpredictable, I look forward to seeing where this goes.
Yeah, me too.
All right, diving right in. Let's look at AI. I find AI in the legal sense, choosing my words here, in the legal sense, to be really fascinating. I know that when it first started to get a lot of use, one of the things it was used for was within the legal field, writing contracts, documents, and such. Diving right in, a lot of AI decision making, it seems, I'm making an assumption because I like to do that here on the show, seems to be driven by men. And in the legal system, or at least law practice, we would hope that women are contributing to that AI. So I just kind of want to get your thoughts on that, how we might better advocate for getting women's voices in to AI.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my issues with a lot of things that are just totally exclusionary in our society is there's this idea that there needs to be some huge push to make something happen, and I think you just need to include the people that are already doing the work, right? Like if I'm creating legal technology that's driven by LLMs and generative AI, then I need all the lawyers that are present and accounted for being involved in the process of training these models, right? Like we can't have the same archetype training these models and expect that whatever they're creating, whatever let's call it white men, whatever they're creating isn't going to be any different from what we already have naturally, right? Like right now, although there are more women going to law school than ever, they still don't make up the top leadership roles in law firms, for example, right? They're still not, top ranked for judgeships, right? And so there's still this kind of lacking. And then when you look at intersectionality, where you're looking at, LGBTQ, Black, brown, whether Asian, Hispanic, whomever, indigenous, the numbers dwindle extraordinarily, right? And we can keep saying, oh, well, there's just not enough of these people, But there are enough people from that, to me anyway, there's enough of a cross section of individuals practicing law in 2025 where if you're not including people, it means you want to be exclusionary. You want to keep them out. And if we're gonna, to me, like, you can't have progress if you're already excluding people, because how are you going to serve these communities in 10, 15 years when you've excluded people that are part of these communities, that have the cultural awareness, that have the socioeconomic awareness, that have, some of like the policy issues that I know for me, like, I'm not necessarily looking at policy issues that impact, undocumented people, because that's not something that's affecting me on a daily basis. So that's not top of mind for me, right? But somebody who has this awareness of the undocumented population, for example, could potentially give you information that I wouldn't be able to, no matter how much my heart goes out to the undocumented population, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I actually have a question, and I don't know if you have an answer, if you've seen it, but again, me making assumptions. So we know that these LLMs can take on bias. We know that. We've seen that. But I feel like when it comes to the use in the legal sense, there shouldn't be a ton of bias, because not being a lawyer, the legal system seems pretty black and white on the contract, like on the LLM use side. Obviously, when you get into, having a jury and all of that due process, there's people involved, there's going to be bias. But I feel like with the LLMs, there should be less bias. Have you seen it come into the LLM process where people are using it for the law?
I mean, well, think of it this way, right? If you only have a certain set of people grading these outcomes that, like a large language model is outputting and saying, oh, this is a good output, this is a bad output, right? And you only have a certain archetype doing that. You think about it, like, for me, I think it's not natural for somebody who's in Southeast Asia, for example, who these are like usually the people that are doing the more precarious work of, is this like a good output? Is this a bad output? Right? And constantly, and that's how the machines learn, right? This is how they learn. And so depending on who's doing that, if they have a bias, because the idea is that, the idea that has been purported, at least since talk of AI has become more mainstream, is that these machines are just kind of coming up with things on their own. But like, that's just not true. Like, there are data centers, there are people managing those data centers, there are people that are actually, grading these components. And so if that person has bias, which they will, we all do, then at some point, whatever bias is present is going to show up in the work, right? And so I know we're talking about it just from a legal perspective, but can't help but talk about, the experiment that I did recently where I just asked ChatGPT, what do you think I look like? Like, it was a very kind of like basic question, just based on me tinkering with ChatGPT for, I don't know, like almost 3 years, because I've been tinkering with it, since like and middle to end of 2022, right? And so when I asked that question, ChatGPT didn't respond with, I need more details about you. It didn't even ask my name. It doesn't know my name. Like, I know a lot of people are quick to kind of put data into these systems, but I haven't actually put my own personal data. I've never uploaded a photo, into OpenAI. Like, I've been kind of inputting like my prompts random. Like if you look at my prompts, they're very schizophrenic. So there's really no, and I'm sorry to use that word so loosely, but it doesn't, like if you look at what I ask ChatGPT in any given day, it's not clear what I do. It's not clear who I am. Like you can't really pin me down, which is probably how people feel about me on LinkedIn too. But what it ultimately outputted was, a Mediterranean looking white man with glasses who is like middle aged, so like between 38 and 40. And so one thing was right, I'm between 38 and 40. But, the fact that it went straight to a white man, like at first I was like, oh, this is really funny. And I made light of it. But then when I asked it the rationale for this assumption that I was a white man, it then went on to say, oh, well, you're really smart, you're really thoughtful in the things that you express. And so, like, yeah. And so the rationale behind it, to me, I was like, oh, this is not a joke. It was one of those things where I was like, okay, this was funny, and now it's not funny because the assumption that in order to be smart, in order to be a leader, in order to have the experiences that it assumed I had based on my input, I had to be a white man. To me, it's clear that these are attributes that have been assigned to white men by the people that are training these models, whether they admit it formally or not. These machines are not training themselves, and they're certainly not in a position to, spontaneously generate any ideas at this stage in the game anyway. So obviously there's bias.
My goodness. I watched you when you had that conversation. You had posted the picture and posted some stuff. I thought it was funny too. I didn't even dive that deep, but wow, that's illuminating. Oh my. Okay. Well, we'll probably circle back to AI, but I kind of want to look at women and men in the legal space and the how we attribute the soft skills and the things that tend to be more feminine in nature with women, and how we can really use those to our advantage when working in the legal system, and not like working in the legal system as in like being in trouble with the law, but lawyering, and how that can help us massage the ecosystem and even elevate women into more leadership roles.
Well, I think for me, I used to make the distinction between like soft and hard skills. And I don't want to take credit for the idea because I'm pretty sure I read it somewhere. I'm always reading something. But, maybe a couple of years ago, I saw an article where they talked about, the fact that we need to stop making that distinction because ultimately we're finding out emotional intelligence, which is normally considered a soft skill, is actually one of the most important skills to have in corporate, but definitely as an attorney, right? And so to answer your question, I would say there needs to be real collegiality within the legal system. I think a lot of firms, a lot of legal organizations talk about being collegial, talk about being collaborative. But when you actually get on these teams or you talk to people that are on these teams, oftentimes you'll find that there's a lot of siloing happening within like teams where people aren't really having the opportunities that they need to. And so how do you get those opportunities? Well, I think the leaders in the room need to be the ones that are actually creating space for women, right? Too many times we keep expecting the people who don't have the power or the authority to finesse or massage or, manipulate the process. But let's be honest, if that were possible, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now, right? Because women have been trying to do it from the ground up at least since 1975, right? And so when we kind of like consider that, like that hasn't worked so far. And so it means we need the buy-in from the people who actually have the authority to affect the change that we want to see. And so on the one hand, I love the idea of a woman's, emotional intelligence or social intelligence, creating space for her. But I think that's why we have the broken rungs, right? Or the glass ceilings, right? Or the glass cliffs, because you can only finesse your way so far if you don't have the support from the people who are, sociopolitically in power in an organization. You can only get so far. And I'll give an example. It's like I think about a conversation I had with an attorney who she was like the co-chair of the diversity committee as an attorney and a partner at the firm that I was working at the time. And I was having an issue. And so I tried talking to her about it because she was somebody who seemed to be in a position of authority, who had the ear of people in power. But I'll never forget when she looked me square in the eye. And this is somebody who, like, she'd been a partner for like 5 to 7 years. So it wasn't like she was a new partner, was the proverbial rainmaker. So like doing all the right things, basically positioned in every which way to what we would assume to affect change, right? But I remember talking to her about my issue and her looking me dead in the eye and saying, hey, like, I wish I could help you, but like, I don't really have any power. And in my head, I thought, well, if you as an equity partner at this firm who has pulled in, tens of millions of dollars, since you became an equity partner, not counting your associate level work, your counsel level work. If you feel like you don't have any power with all your titles and attachments, how does somebody like me, who's a more junior attorney, finesse or massage anything when you have the key but you're afraid to open the gate, and so I and part of that I think comes down to culture, right? It's like, what's the sense in promoting women if we're not going to create an environment where they feel safe enough to voice their opinions to affect the change that they want to see? Like, are we just adding women are we only adding women to uphold, the patriarchy, to uphold, systems that were created under white supremacy? Like, is that the only thing we care about? Do we actually want people to be actively involved in the evolution of the industry? And for me, like, I'm really harsh with the legal industry because no other industry has as much impact on everyday life. If you look at every Fortune 500 company, they have a legal department, right? And we already know, like, money is what makes the world go around. Like, people don't want to talk about it, but like, we know that that's what happens, right? I mean, just look at how we bow down to people just because they have some money. Like, you don't have to have good morals anymore. You just have to have a lot of money and people are willing to bow down to you, right? And then like you add that layer of like the legal industry parallel to the economics of the system, and you realize, wow, like, we're not getting ahead because lawyers are afraid to stand up to what's wrong, what's unjust. Like, we're afraid to do our jobs. Like, that doesn't make sense, right? And we definitely saw that with the top 100 firms, so many of them capitulating to the issues with Donald Trump, and attacks on the rule of law. And now, like, it's I don't know, it's kind of disappointing, to be honest.
What you described sounds like a terrible catch-22, and I wonder if you have views on how we get out of it. Because what you explained is a cycle that we have to get there to make the change, but we're only getting there as almost like a we filled that spot. We've the one bucket check. So then change doesn't happen.
Yeah.
How do we get out of that?
Well, I think, I'm going to lean on the men in this situation, because ultimately, like, it's the people with the power and authority who can affect change, right? But I also think that women who get into these roles, you kind of have to go into it, and people hate when I say this privately, but I'll say it publicly. Like, I'll use myself. As a Black woman, I was the only Black finance attorney, and Black, like, even racialized looking, because there were people who said they were Black, but like you don't see Black when you see them. I'm just gonna say that, like I can't pass for anything but Black, right? And so, like, for me, I took that like, I went into my career with the idea that, like, yes, like, this was for me, this was for my own growth, my own development, but also this was my opportunity to create space for people that looked like me, right? And I think that that second part is really hard. And so I don't want to, and it comes at a very high cost, because you're constantly thinking about how your work product, how everything you're doing can potentially impact other people's ability to get into the room, right? And so when I was at law firms, I made it my business as as a first year associate, I was doing recruiting interviews. I was on the diversity committee. I was having those hard conversations about how come we only have one Black partner in, a global law firm. I was that person, and the only time I was heard was when a white man stood up, and 9 out of 10 times it was when they stood up and said, no, Aubria is right. Like, how do we fix that? Right. And I saw those moments when somebody, a senior partner, or a managing partner, stood up and was like, oh, you know what? No, she's right. Like, no, we need to do it that way. That's when I saw changes happen. Because at the end of the day, like, I think it's a fiction to think that the brand new person can come in and completely shift the atmosphere of an organization without the help of people who are politically positioned. And so, like, you need the political and social capital to be able to affect the change. And so, like, I can remember specific moments when a senior middle-aged white man partner spoke up when a woman was afraid. Like, a woman similarly situated was afraid to speak up, even though she was similarly situated to him, right? And it was only after he spoke up then she was co-signing to it, right? And so my next thing is, like, we have to grow a pair. Like, I'm sorry, but we can't get into this habit of wanting to grow, and like, to me, it's like, I can't be a good leader if I'm not considering how I can help create more leaders. I'm not thinking about how I can affect change. Like, leadership is more than, oh, I have the title and I'm getting the paycheck. Like, the point of leadership is to effect change, is to create, like, true succession, right? To create sustainability within an organization. And women, if we're going to put ourselves, like, if we're going to throw our hat into, the ring for the item, right? For the glory. We have to get to a place where it's not just about us, and again, like, it comes with great cost, because you could get sucker punched and lose everything. But I think a lot of firms right now, especially in the US, have something like 30% or more of their leaders are women. And so my thing is, use your critical mass. Band together, right? We can't keep, to me, it's like, I don't know what we're waiting for. But I feel like when I used to hear stories, in the late 90s as a kid about what was going on in boardrooms, and I think about the stories I hear now, or even being a witness sometimes in some of these rooms, like, it's a bit, for me, it's just saddening and maddening, because I'm like, okay, I'm aged now, and I'm having the same conversation that people in like 1997 were having. That doesn't make sense.
Moment to choose anarchy, maybe.
But that's the thing, right? I think we've been so comforted. We've had a lot of comfort in the 20th and 21st, like, basically, like, post-World War, Vietnam. We've had a lot of comfort. Like, not saying that there hasn't been tragedy, but, like, as modern Americans, we have had a lot of comfort, right? To the point where we think we're fighting for justice when we have, LinkedIn arguments, But I remember when I was a professor, like, I'll use that. Like, I remember when I was a professor, and I was teaching social justice classes, teaching my students how to, like, think critically about what was going on at any given moment, right? And watching, like, policy unfold, where we were kind of like, whoa, like, we were just talking about that last week, professor, like, and so to me, if me as a first generation everything person can notice that, why isn't somebody who has like 30 years experience in the legal field noticing, one, but taking the initiative, right? Be like, do I want judicial leaders, political leaders, legal leaders, knowing how much impact it has on every area of our life? Like, do I want people who are afraid to do the right thing? Or do I want people who are going to do the right thing because at some point somebody has to pay the toll, right? And what has happened so far, at least in the legal industry from my vantage point, is a lot of passing the buck. It's a lot of, I can't do it because, everybody has a mortgage, everybody has stuff, right? And so to me, it's like, how are you executive partners and afraid, right? How are you impacting the work? Like how are you joining financial committees for the president, right? Education committees for the president, because it's the lawyers at these large firms are doing that, right? So how are you impacting people at scale, but you can't do what needs to be done in your 400 to 2,000 people organization? What? You shouldn't have access. To me, if you can't make the appropriate changes at a small scale, if I can't trust you with little, you shouldn't have access to much, right? Because if you haven't done the work, what am I using? What metric am I using as a country, as a political power, as a huge organization with global reach? what metric am I using to say that you are an appropriate candidate for a role if you haven't, like, there, you have no receipts? Or if I look at your receipts, they look an awful lot the same. I mean, oh my God. I was looking at, this woman's no longer an attorney, but this, maybe a few months ago, there was a woman on LinkedIn talking about how it was easier for her to, and this was a black woman, it was easier for her to train and develop white junior staff, white male junior staff. She was that specific because they were more eager. And I thought to myself, ain't no way you, like, how are you as a black woman who is in the position to help? To me, I'm like, you don't have to help only black people. Like, I think that's weird. Like, I'll admit, I help everybody. I don't care. You know, that's just how I am. Like, if you want my help, I will help you. You know, because to me, it's like, if I help a white junior attorney figure something out, the next time they have access to helping a brown or black person, they're going to be more inclined to do it because they're going to remember in the back of their minds, when I needed help, that black woman helped me. That's why I do it. You know? So for me, it's like, I'm not exclusive in that way. And sometimes I get heat from the black community for that as well. But my thing is, like, I want to create a world where my race isn't relevant. You know, I want it to become irrelevant. And the only way it becomes irrelevant is if I have to first treat it as irrelevant, right? And that's not to say that I'm completely ignoring. And I'll admit, I do the same thing with gender, too. Like, with my sex and gender, I do that, too. Like, I don't talk to men like I'm the lesser vessel, if you will. You know? If we're talking finance, I'm talking to you the way we're supposed to talk finance. Like, I'm not pretending I have imposter syndrome. Like, I don't have a chip on my shoulder worried that you're going to harm me. But I also know that the reason I'm this way is because I had a white stepfather, you know? So my sensibilities are a lot different. I also grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood in the US, but on top of that, partially grew up in the Caribbean, which was mostly homogenous. So I have this strong sense of self that is beyond my race. You know, if anything, I think I have more loyalty to my family than I do race, like my actual kin, than I do skin, if you will. And you could keep that in there.
I have 2 points I want to drill down to, and I want to keep it kind of tight because I also want to dive into your endeavors. One is, do you think that woman that made that statement, possibly outside of all the other things, she made that statement because she experiences these young white men as eager, but it's because they lack boundaries or the same boundaries?
I think it's twofold. I saw women do that. I saw women attorneys do that at the two firms that I worked at, actually, where they were biased to the men. And part of the reason they were, you know, like that woman, to me, I think what upset me about her statement was the fact that I thought she was being disingenuous. I don't think it's about eagerness, and I don't necessarily think it's about this lack of boundaries, at least from my vantage point. I think it's if the senior leader in my practice group thinks John is great and awesome, I'm going to agree with the senior leader. And I want to make sure that when John talks to the senior leader, it's like about it's survival. That's really what it's all about. It's about this like survivalism. And I saw that where it's like I saw like the women that were leading the women's groups at firms investing more time bringing their my white counterparts to the lunches, to the dinners, to the business development meetings without batting an eye. You know, being really hard on myself and other women attorneys, but kind of letting things that were like obviously inappropriate behavior slide because it happened, you know. And again, like I I understand it, but I don't excuse it, you know, because I think too many people want the positions, but they don't want to do what the position requires of them.
Okay, I'm hoping this next question kind of dovetails into the next question, which is diving into your endeavors. But you mentioned something that I did want to look at. You are, you have been and do teach as a professor of law, I'm guessing, in the.
So I actually was like I was an English professor for 9.5 years. But because I have interest in the law, we had a social justice seminar that I baked into my particular syllabus. And the school allowed me to do it. You know, I'm like, maybe the students were doing really well when they left my company, but they kept me around for 9.5 years, so I had to be doing something right. But I did go back to my alma mater, Brooklyn Law School, 2 years in a row to teach debt finance, which for me was like a huge deal because that's my cup that was my bread and butter when I was, you know, practicing full time. And so having my school reach out and ask me to come and teach with, you know, the head of debt finance at Deloitte and like, you know, a renowned scholar in secured transactions, like, and I'm like 2.5 years out of law school. Like that was pretty that like looking back, I was very a lot about it when it was happening, but looking back I'm like, that was a huge deal. Just and holding my own, like going I like remember even the first time I did it. The head of, you know, debt finance at Deloitte at the time was kind of like, he was like, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's a really good point about like something I said. And like I don't even remember what I said. I was so fixated on the fact that he thought something I said was so brilliant. And I remember at the time I was so worried that I wasn't on target for my own learning and had been pressuring myself to do like a lot of like continued learning and you know, all the things overachievers do, right? And part of it was like I was working in an environment where it didn't matter what I did as long as I was attached to it. There was a like it didn't matter. Like it was one of those things where I I'd never experienced that before. I always tell people like merit has protected me my whole life. Until like, you know, this very and it wasn't even a long time. Like looking back, it was probably like a 12-month period of like the time that I was at this place where I realized that like whenever I asked a question, like people would make me feel like I was crazy or like, why don't you know that? And then I realized after a while, like the thing about being an overachiever is like once you start doing all the work, you realize the reason people aren't telling you the answer to your question is because they don't know the answer. And there's a lot of that in the legal field. So like I don't even think it was that environment necessarily. It was just like for me, it was just like a I don't know, like congested is the right word, but it was like I was like in a bottleneck of that. And so but what ultimately ended up happening is I became an expert sooner than I should have because I had to do a lot of the work on my own. So I remember I was like spending 4 to 6 hours a day doing my own learning. Sometimes as much as like 20 hours a week of additional learning, because I didn't want to be caught with my pants down, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. My question that I was going to pose about you being a professor, though, was actually because you have been a professor in any capacity, you are teaching that next generation. And we talked about how history hasn't changed very much because people are refusing to challenge things with the money and all the different things. People aren't challenging what they should be. I do feel Gen Z, and again, making assumptions, and my daughter is Gen Alpha, they're not having any of it. They really aren't. Like they're not having it. Do you think that as Gen Z and Gen Alpha come up, things might change, or do you think look into your glass ball and tell me?
I have a lot of hope for the young people. I think that millennials have been crushed. Like, I'm a millennial, and I thought, like, I was doing like a paper recently, and I thought about just what it looked like from like 1984 through 2020, and I was like, we weren't supposed to survive that. Like, the generation, and it wasn't even Gen X, like, it's actually the generation before Gen X that has strategically tried to crush us. You know?
They're boomers, right?
You know? I don't want to say that word. I was trying to avoid it.
I said it for you.
As
There
best
you go.
as I can. But it's like when you look at a lot of it's like, I think of it as like a stronghold on American society in particular. People of, the people that were born in the 50s, right? For the most part. Some people born in the 40s, but mostly the people born in like the 50s specifically, who refuse to admit that they're no longer in a position to move our country forward. And this is not ageism. Like, to me, it's like ageism works both ways, right? Like, you telling me that as a 25-year-old, I'm too young to know what life is about, but you can ship me off in a draft to go fight war at 18, tells me that you don't actually care about me as a human. You look at me as a cog in a machine, right? A cog in a wheel. And so, to answer your question, I remember when I first started teaching, a lot of my students were very similar to me in like values, core values, or whatever. I wouldn't call myself, I'm definitely not a liberal, but I'm not conservative either. But like, I hate moderate.
Is that because it feels middle of the road? It's in the gray.
And it's not even that. Like, I feel like I just have extreme ideas on both ends.
Oh.
Right? But I have enough sense to know that there are just certain things about human life that we shouldn't even be voting on. For all the people that are listening to this, I feel like so much of life has been considered political that really has nothing to do with politics, that has more to do with people that have political power usurping individual rights and usurping family rights. Like, there are a lot of things that really should be handled at the level of family that we have allowed to become political concerns. And as religious as I am, I don't think any religion should have the authority to take over another person's life. And if you look at all of the holy texts, none of these religions, maybe with the exception of one, I won't name it, but none of these religions want you to feel forced into taking on the values. They want it to be a choice, right? But we live in a society right now where people are so busy trying to control other people's behaviors instead of just controlling themselves. Because, frankly, with the exception of very few things, certain things just, to me, I'm like, why are we even talking about this? Like, why do I care? You know? Like, and for me, I think when it becomes a problem, why a lot of it becomes politicized is because a lot of times politicians, they use they prey on people's emotions, and that's what we talked about in my classes. We talked about how words were used to make people feel inferior, but also to show people in the political majority why somebody was inferior to them, which would allow them to create laws, and customs and systems to, subjugate difference in society. And it's crazy because if you told me in 2011 when I first taught that class that I was gonna be alive when we did it at like maximum scale with at no care, in 14 years, I'd be like, no way. like America's never gonna be that bizarre. Like, we're gonna hide behind, this idea of, yeah, like decorum and professionalism and, but that's no longer a thing, right? As much as people try to uphold those systems of decorum and civility, it's usually the people that are being victimized that are expected to be civil, right? And so I will say I am really excited for the young people. And I hope they'll allow me, they'll give me like an executive assistant role in their revolution. Because I think we need to stop, as a society, we need to stop restricting the people that are going to be impacted the most by our decisions. And like that's what's been happening. That's what's happening with AI. It's like when you look at the people that are and the most negative impact, I should say, it's the majority of people that are experiencing the negative impact, but we keep deferring to people who have proven time and time again that they don't care about people.
Gosh, this episode is so good. Okay,
I know this is a spicy episode.
I know it really is, and we've gone way past time, but I still have more questions, so we're just gonna do it. I'm gonna try and stick this landing with the last two questions, but really, I want to look at your endeavors. So, you're a polymath. You have a ton of stuff going on, but you recently launched LegalEase, and you did that because, and I would say when looking at LegalEase, I felt this even just in general entry level jobs, some parts of just going through the college process, but you launched it specific to college legal students
Yeah.
because there is the pressure to perform high, do it all. And this is where I felt like it kind of was in line with all the other things, is that it's like a badge of honor. Like, yeah, I did that thing and it was rough and it was terrible, but I did it. And so you launched LegalEase to help address that. Can you tell me about that?
Oh my God, I feel like I started doing like mentoring of law students while I was still very much a law student. And so I feel like people end up asking me questions. I always tell people I have one of those faces where people just think I know the answers to things. Maybe this is what happens when you are a polymath. They just assume you know things. But ultimately, earlier this year, it was like I had a slew of inbound requests for my time. Oh, I want to pick your brain about this. Oh, I have this issue. I'm trying to decide on law schools. Can you help me? These are complete strangers, mind you. Like, these are not people I know. And a lot of times not even affiliated with my law school. I will say I have a bias to helping people at Brooklyn Law. And for me, it's like, it goes back to what I said about creating the environment that you want to see, right? And so I'm part of the alumni board at Brooklyn Law School, and we do a lot of giving back to that community. But I thought about how good it would be if I could create something where people could just come and get what they needed, right? And so, like, law school is a beast because it's so opaque in so many ways. And you almost, with a very few people, like, I feel like unless you know somebody who's gone through the process, who's willing to tell you about the process, because that second part is really important, you're kind of like fighting an uphill battle, because a lot of times you don't find out about the things that matter for your career until it's too late. And so you've heard, oh, grades don't matter. You've heard that, right? About like college degrees. Oh, your grades don't matter. You're going to learn on the job. Well, with law school, your grades matter. And not having the right grades eliminates opportunities off the bat, right? And so unless you're like a high-ranking law student, grades-wise, you might not even get the opportunity to interview for a role, okay? Forget getting the role. Like, you can't even submit your resume because you don't fit the mold of what they're looking for. And a lot of times this is framed as, oh, well, it only matters if you're doing big law. Like, I was a big law attorney, and maybe in times past that was true, but even if you're doing the public interest role where you're not making that much money, you're doing it because you care about people and want to save the world, your grades still matter, because there are people who are top ranked who want those roles too, who maybe don't want to go into big law. And so now, like, you still have to have like the right grades, and you need them your first year of law school. That's the rough part. It's like, you're figuring out law school, you're figuring out the classes, and to get into law school, it doesn't really matter what you got your degree in. So you could be an art student that went to law school. You can be an engineer that went to law school, an English major, a poli-sci, but like, it kind of runs the gambit. And I'm sorry, but if you weren't reading a ton in undergrad, you're probably not going to be as successful as somebody who's been, who comes in with like a master's degree in, insert random, degree about something, right? And so part of the reason I created LegalEase is because I wanted to create equal footing, kind of no matter what your background is, giving people the information early so they can make clear decisions, like, what do I want to go for, right? And for me, like, another part of the reason for doing it is because, like, in law school, there's grading on the curve, right? But if students are doing so well, and I haven't said this publicly before, but the goal is to eliminate the need for curves. It's like fake scarcity, because I think that's what creates the type of, lack of collegiality. It's like you're trained that way to, not be happy for your friend if they do well in a class, because now that means you probably didn't do well because there was only, they could only get 5 A's in that class, and now you got a B plus because like you would have been A number 6, right? So creating that environment, one, giving you kind of an outline of timing, milestones for particular opportunities, but also providing some kind of like tutoring for people, a sort of prep, like pre-law prep, where you're learning, okay, how do I read for class? Because there's a way to read. Like, you're not reading for pleasure here. Like, you're reading to suck out like the actual information. So how do I read 10 cases a night for 3 classes, right? So how am I reading 30 cases, distilling them and getting them done, and learning what I need to know? Like, how do I write an exam and do well? How do I outline for an exam? And so giving people that, but also creating pipelines based on my own network. And so I have, lawyers. I have lawyer friends that are doing public service work, doing like government work, government lawyering. I have friends that are at nonprofits. I have friends at mid-sized firms, solo proprietors, but also large firms. And so the goal with LegalEase was, one, to just streamline the information in one place, but 2, create a real community where people could come, get their questions answered, get some, group coaching, right? And kind of build that community. And so to me, like, it's great to have community within your law school, but it's also great to kind of know what other people are doing in other law schools too, and get a clearer idea. I remember that was something I cared about when I was a student, in undergrad especially. Like, I would always be like, well, you want to get like good grades at your school, because at the end of the day, when everyone graduates, you have like all the A's across the hundreds of schools, right, in the US alone, and then all the B's, all the C's, whatever. And so like, you want to be among the A's, right? And some people are like, oh, what's your obsession with grades? Well, guess what? That's like probably the most fair metric that we could use, And are there biases in grading? Yes, there are. But that would be another call.
Well, we are past time. I do love to show. Bleh. I do love to end the show with 3 hacks. These can be for the students. It can be for AI. Anything you want. Your top 3 hacks.
Okay. So I'll do one for each. So for AI technology, what I will say is you want to make sure that you're educating yourself. There's a lot of like boosting of AI. There's a lot of dooming of AI. But at the end of the day, the best thing you can do for yourself right now is to educate yourself, read as much as you can, read across demographics, what's being written, so you can get a clear idea of what's going on and come up with your own critique of AI rather than just adopting somebody else's. For lawyers that are in leadership, whether you're in government, no matter kind of wherever you are in the legal industry, if you're somebody who's in leadership, recommit to preparing new attorneys to lead. We can no longer lead forever, right? And he's not a lawyer. Warren Buffett recently retired at 94. And people were kind of lauding that. And for me, what I saw was somebody who was such a control freak that they couldn't train and develop anybody else so that they could take over that role. To me, like there's a lot of ego there, and nothing. Sorry, Warren, love you, whatever. But like to me, that's not a flex. Working until you're 94, what that shows is like you're unwilling to pass the baton, and we need to be willing to pass the baton. And the only way we can do that is when we train and develop people from every demographic, because our world has changed, right? Our world has changed. And we can no longer say, oh, this is what the client wants, because guess what? The clients are changing as well. Money is changing hand. And if you want to be a sustainable legal professional, if you want to be somebody who has sustainability, longevity, versatility, you need to be willing to train and develop the next row of leaders. Law students, don't take yourself so seriously. I know I just went off about grades. At the end of the day, you have to be willing to treat people with respect. It comes down, and I guess ultimately that's what the hack is. You have to treat everyone with respect, because you just, I want to say, because it's a good thing to do and all of that, but nobody really cares about that. As much as we talk about it, nobody really cares about being a good person as much as we talk about it, right? And so it's less about doing it just for being a good person, but it's part of your ability to thrive is by your ability to relate to people, treat people with respect, and people respect people who are respectful as a general matter. And so that would be it. Read as much as you can, get educated for AI, be willing to pass the baton if you're a leader, but you can't pass the baton if you haven't trained and developed people. And then as a law student, you're just starting out, build relationships, treat people with kindness and dignity. It'll take you far.
I love it. For the people tuning in who want to reach out, want to connect, want to get to know you, want to work with you, anything and everything in between, how do they find you?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Aubria, so pretty easy. Or you can, find me on scrappygirlproject.com. And, it seems like I'm always online. I'm always there in spirit. But, usually I need 24 hours to respond to people.
I will put your contact in the show notes. Aubria, it is always so fun having these conversations with you. Thank you for taking your afternoon to speak with me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to today's episode. For all the juicy deets on this episode, be sure to check out our show notes or give us a holler on Instagram at Hacking the Patriarchy Podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support this podcast, don't be shy. Please share it with your friends. Sharing is caring after all. Lastly, if you'd like to lend your personal support, please take a moment to tell the world about it with a review on your favorite streaming platform. We'd be forever grateful. Tune in again soon to enjoy a brand new episode of the Hacking the Patriarchy podcast. And until next time, keep on hacking, my friends.